Good evening, everyone. I'm Merope Mills. I'm an editor and partner here at Tortoise Media. Thank you for joining me on this rather sort of gloomy autumnal evening. And specifically, thank you for joining me, Ruby Wax, who we are in conversation with tonight, if I can get my words out, who is helping us to find reasons to be cheerful in these dark and gloomy times. Ruby Wax is a comedian, she's a performer, a writer, a mental health campaigner, and an author of a great book, which I'm just about to come to. But before we get started, I'll just repeat some of those things that hopefully you logged on the slides just then, which is to say, we all want you to get involved, and we all want you to talk to Ruby, tell her your thoughts, ideas, and we prefer no questions, but you know, I'm not going to be strict about it tonight. And there are two ways Ruby went like that. Two ways you can do that. You can raise your hand by going to the participants bar, and there's a little raise hand button that appears underneath the list of names, and you can click that, or you can get involved in the chat with my excellent colleague Claudia. There she is, isn't she wonderful? And she'll be there chatting away with you if you'd like. So Ruby, coming to you now. The received wisdom is that 2020 is the worst year ever. And yet you have written a book entitled "And Now for Some Good News," which is a love letter to the future. And as you write it in your introduction, this sounds like a macabre joke in the circumstances. But tell me what made you write it in the first place. And yeah, go.
Well, first of all, I do write on the back that you might think it's a macabre joke, but I finished writing the book the day with lockdown started. So it was a surprise to me. Luckily, otherwise this is in poor taste.
Is it in poor taste, or is it needed more than ever?
But I didn't know 3 years ago when I started the book, but there was bad news then. That's why I decided to write this book, because I couldn't watch. The news was making me crazy. And there was no respite. You know, if it was one disaster, then that was gone. Then there was next headline. There's an earthquake halfway around the world. Already I'm panicked, because they like to keep you, you know, with your teeth chattering, because then you'll watch more news to figure out where's the next bit of disaster. And I kind of know where you pay attention neurologically defines who you are in that minute. So if you're constantly in the slipstream of bad news, that's who you become. And it's pretty addictive. I mean, we are addicted to the things that aren't good for us. That's why nobody gets addicted to kale. But it's my theory. So I decided, let's take your attention, Ruby. I mean, it's like practicing a sport and move it. Now, I don't mean positive. You know, a man wore a hat and walked back and forth across his garden to save sardines. I'm not doing that. I went around the globe to find the real innovators who were creating something phenomenal, not a one-off fluke. They were really making the future look hopeful. And I became quite happy. And I thought, I'm going to use this as my journey so that I can take some of these tips and bring it to my life. And that's sort of what the book does, is you don't have to go to Finland to experience great education, which, by the way, they have the greatest in the world. You can take some of that and bring it to a school where your kid grows up, or you can think about it and use it as a parent. These are exercises that it doesn't matter if they don't speak the same language, they work. And business has a kind of new, it's called conscious capitalism. And these aren't small companies, these are big companies that are embracing fairness and transparency and things that we avoided in the past, thinking, well, somebody will screw you if you tell everybody. But the next generation really do want transparency, and they'll get it.
We'll come to some of those. That, I mean, you know, you structure the book about in a certain way, and we'll come to some of those topics in a minute. But just picking up on one of those things you said, do you think the bad news is making us bad people, bad and angry people?
Well, who's making the news? There's the question. Who buys the newspaper? Who's watching the news? It's, you know, a dog chasing its tail. How do we know? You know, I mean, I remember, well, when Diana died, some of the people throwing the flowers had certain newspapers in their back pocket, you know, that had the pictures. And I thought, are we aware how much we contribute? You know, everybody tears their hair out about technology. Well, we put it there. It didn't land in the garden like a meteorite. And you don't have to punish yourself because it's a kind of cultural malaise. I mean, and I wrote another book called How to Be Human. And the whole point of it is that we are not our fault. There's certain glitches in us. You know, we work perfectly back on the savannah. This thing was built to function perfectly. I mean, we had the right degree of shame, fear, guilt, and there was a point to it, competition to step up to the tribe. But now the world is so kind of artificially stimulated, which we made, and it's got fabulous things. I mean, I'm talking to you, otherwise I'd have to send a pigeon to where you're sitting. But our little human brain, some of it's very primitive. It didn't disintegrate since, you know, the old days. I mean, 500,000 years ago, it's still, some of it is still there. Of course, the brain grew and grew and grew. But as I say, some of it is primitive. It doesn't realize the wallpapers change, and that's why we can't deal with the complexities of the 21st century. So don't blame yourself. It just happened, right? Technologically, we're geniuses, emotionally, we're morons. Story.
So I mean, the line that I took from the introduction, that you're here to convince us that the world isn't as bad as we've been.
No, I'm not going to convince you. All I'm doing is giving you a kind of Michelin guide to say this is what people are doing. It's a menu. You can, it's science. You either look at the facts or ignore them. That's your choice. I'm not convincing you of anything. I mean, it's totally irrelevant to people who love their life and they like dog eat dog and they're very successful and they're very popular and they love tweeting. Don't buy my book. Don't buy it. The news is you're adjusted to it. You know, every one of us is a different fingerprint. So if the way you live, it gives you pleasure, what am I supposed to tell you? I envy.
You yourself had a lot of pleasure in these particular ideas. Let's go to the first one in the book, which is community. And it feels like a really appropriate place to start because you are not at home now yourself. You are living in one of the communities that you write about for the next month in Scotland. Do you want to tell everyone about that?
Well, let me say why it's community. I mean, let's learn from the pandemic is that there's an interconnectedness that I feel now, not everybody, especially because I do Frazzle Cafes in the evening. It's an online group, which I've had running for 4 years in real cafes. Now I'm online 3 times a week. And I meet strangers, there's about 80 people, but because we're listening to each other and we're not distracted by, technology because we're on it, ironically, I can see their eyes and I can see we pass this oxytocin, this bonding chemical that I used to think is impossible to do on the screen, but it isn't. And everybody feels like everybody's got everybody's back. And that's the blueprint of the people who are the movers and shakers in education, in business, in health, and in everything else, in tech. The main theme is humans were born to mingle, and the glue that keeps us together is compassion. And I used to not be able to say the C word, but when you do ooze that thing that makes you like somebody or bond with somebody. I mean, we did it back in again, hundreds of thousands of years ago. We all sat around the fire after a hard day's hunt. Some people had been eaten, but the rest of us sat around and we all cooled each other's fight and flight down. That's the point of community, is that we all have each other's backs. No one human can take everything, but we forgot that.
So I mean, you just mentioned the idea of mingling there, and you know, one of the lines in your book is, "We've lost the point of us. The point of us is to mingle." I mean, do you feel that, especially now that we've been so far apart for months on end, or are you feeling that this is a substitute? You know, like, for example, what we're doing now, you know, we would have once done this in the Tortoise newsroom, but now we're doing it here.
Yeah, but it doesn't enhance community. It's a medium. It's communication, but community is what I've seen evidence of it. After, a few weeks, people started, when they could go out, they could meet they started in small little towns, meet in town halls. This was happening out of London, and people weren't discussing the next, whatever it is, village fete, where they dress a goat up as Charlie Chaplin. I don't know what these people do. But now they were talking about what day they were all going to pick up the rubbish and going to people and knocking on the door. And let's not forget Thursday nights where everybody smashed their pots and pans. So now everybody has the feeling of that love was rolling down my street. I don't even know my neighbors. Now I want to marry them. So we know what it tastes like. And it's in us. We're born with this need. If you don't bond with your mother, you're not going to grow. Your brain doesn't develop. So we have it in us. It's just that we've lost touch, and it has a bad rap of making you vulnerable. But the community I took literally when I was doing community. So I visited cities where they're doing urban planning, like Copenhagen. So the buildings aren't facing a road or, a endless spaghetti hoop of generic shops, because then you become generic. If it's not, you know what those shops are. If you see the same thing day in, day out, you become, what can I say? You become a stereotype. What more can I say? You can only be what you're looking at. So what they do is they have communal areas between the buildings that are, the idea is to make it less about the destination, but giving you pleasure in the journey. So there's little areas where you sit together if you want to. There's hammocks where you can lie if you want to. There's benches that are close together, so you talk, not just staring at a swan. And it does make for a happier life. Then I went into rural communities, which I'm in one now, where they intentionally build a neighborhood, or there is a neighborhood that exists and everybody agrees, let's create this intentional community. So they don't use electricity. I mean, they're using solar paneling, and they have done for, 20 years where I am now. And it's biomass, all those things that environmentalists talk about, but I never knew what they meant. I'd go, oh yes, sustainability. What do I know? I know here now I know what they're doing. They take waste and they turn it into water, and the water the gardens, and if you are interested, you can really walk the talk. I'm not saying at home, but at least I know the information that I'm ranting about, because my theory before this was, I'd be at dinner parties and everybody's yapping about the next problem, like it's out there. It's, the bully's out there, the bully's in our minds. So I thought, well, either get off the pot, which is an American expression, or shut up. And so I did. I went out and saw there's a community in London, in South London, called Bedzed, where, and by the way, the housing is free. It's given by the Peabody estate. So these lucky people live there. They have a community center where all the women take care of each other's babies, and the elderly have classes, all free. And then they all have gardens where they can pick their own vegetables. And it's just, there's no heating bill. So it can be done with little money.
Sounds
but
perfect.
The main thing is use the town halls to meet people.
I'm just looking
at loneliness.
Looking at a couple of the chat contributions. Samantha is expressing, I don't know whether it's disbelief or confirming solar paneling in Scotland. And there's a lovely comment from Emma saying the last 6 months she's felt forgotten and left out, and but communities she felt part of online, including Tortoise, which would be lovely to hear from you, Emma, if you are willing to talk about that. I will say, Ruby, one thing did make me laugh when you talked about community in your chapter on community was your attitude to parties, which was that you were absolutely livid if people didn't invite you. But then when they did invite you, you dreaded having to turn up at the party and having to be the most sparkly, interesting version of yourself. I wondered if you felt more pressure in that sense because of your reputation as, Ruby Wax, fun-loving performer.
No, even before I appeared on television, I have this thing, I always wanted to belong to a community. And I came from sort of parents who didn't fit the mold, to say the least. I wrote a book about them, that they are one of the most bizarre couples. That Carrie Fisher edited this book about 20 years ago, and she said my parents were almost as strange as hers, so you can't get them reviews. They're insane in a way that everything out of their mouth I used in my comedy. I didn't have to edit anything. It was so bizarre. So I would stare out the window next to my dog and look at Americans having barbecues. And I just wanted to be part of the, maybe they hated each other, but I just wanted to go there and share some coleslaw. And so I've always had this drive to be part of something. Maybe that's mine, and I didn't believe in Jesus, though I did go to some born again meetings and just wanted to hug everybody like they were doing and believe and clap.
You about being jealous of that sort of sense of community within religion, even though you're not religious yourself. I think Emma's there and she's got a comment for you about community, and I'm going to turn a light on because I'm going to do that. Hello, Emma.
I like the way that you picked the positive bit of my comment out, because that's I mean, I think Tortoise has been brilliant, and there's been a couple of other things where I've been able to access things like this, intelligent conversations, seeing other adults. I'm single, I'm a single parent, both me and my child are disabled. We quite often get forgotten about and left out. I'm not first in anybody's thoughts. In actual lockdown, I had one friend that video called me, and that was it. I can go 2 or 3 days without having any communication with anybody at all. So without online communities, I wouldn't have anywhere to be expressing myself and having a conversation and seeing other grown-ups. It's me and a teenager, and that's quite hard. And it can be really make you feel very lonely and very vulnerable. And the word community I find really difficult, because communities are about groups of like-minded people. And if you are not of the mould, which I'm not quite as weird as your parents, Ruby, but I'm definitely not standard, and neither's my child. It's really hard to be accepted as part of a community, because people don't generally extend themselves to people that are different. They don't understand different forms of communication.
Do you feel that more strongly since COVID then? I mean,
hugely. I have felt so forgotten. Like to go a few days without hearing from anybody at all is because and what's in the news that people try and kind of flag up as the positive stuff is this, oh, it's brilliant, it's a great sense of community, I know my neighbours now, we've got a street WhatsApp group, and it's like, that isn't the reality for a lot of us. I don't have a family, I don't have a partner. Who is it that's going to remember me, that's going to think about me, that's going to drop me a text to see how I am, who's going to ask, are you okay today? And all of the communities I've ever felt part of in my life in the age of the internet have been online, because there's no geographical barrier. I can meet people across the world, across the rest of the UK. I don't have to travel to them. And that's a really liberating thing that the internet has done for groups of people like me that can't necessarily get out and talk to people. I wouldn't go to one of your cafes when it was an actual cafe.
Well, you can come now. And let me say,
what would be your advice, Emma?
The downside of community is, and it was tribal, is that you don't look like me, and so I'm with my people. When we have a common purpose, and this is also reflected in the business chapter. For example, on Frazzled, there's every age and there's every denomination. Okay, and when people have the concern for that person listening, and they're focused and they're not frazzled, because that's the enemy when you're thinking so much about yourself in this cocoon of self-absorption. When we do calm each other down, that's what community does, is that we can start to listen, and we realize whatever color, whatever age you get, we have really young people, we have people that are disabled, we have somebody who's dying of cancer. But she says, when I'm on this, I'm not advertising Frazzled because I'd love other people to create something like this, is that they say they feel heard and that they matter. And that's what we were lacking before this. We have to look at each other, that I really, it's for an hour or whatever, but I like you because you talk honestly, not because you're selling me something. Or, you have a million friends. I like you even more that you have one. I think vulnerability makes you incredibly attractive. And we have to start to realize that.
Yeah, so, and thank you so much for your honesty. And I really sort of empathize, actually. It's a really difficult.
Emma, come to Frazzled. Seriously, it's free.
Since you mentioned it, let's turn to the next bit of your book, the business bit of your book.
Oh, right.
Ruby, I felt really uplifted by a lot of the stories in your book, but don't be cross with me, but I did feel some cynicism in this chapter. And I'll tell you why. So you wrote about how your generation were advocates of equality and fairness, and campaigners and on the streets, but they ended up becoming the establishment. And then you wrote rather wonderfully about your hope for this next generation. 83% of millennials are more likely to trust a company if they are socially responsible or environmentally aware. And you've talked about how millennials are much more motivated by mission rather than money, and the rise of conscious capitalism. Is that really true, or is it just another marketing gimmick?
Well, yes, some people are just greenwashing, where they put a wind machine in the men's loo instead of a hand dryer, and giving people a bonus if they don't flush the toilet. There's always going to be shysters who are using whatever the latest fad is. But as I started off the chapter talking about my upbringing, should I just read a little bit from that?
Yes, do read a little.
And then I'll get to where, so I started off exactly like you. I don't buy it. I don't trust business. That's what I come from. My father was a quintessential first generation American businessman. He knew how to sell high through charm and razor sharp savvy and buy low, ripping you off while you were sleeping. I assumed that was business as normal, ruthless, cutthroat, and made the biggest shyster in the trough win. I'd listen to my dad as he pimped his sheep bladders. That's what he did. He ran a sausage casing company, and that's what he sold. I once heard him say he never conquered Americanisms. Well, that's the way the chickens cumbles, pretending he was lighthearted and jokey with customers. So I was raised in the belief that the most conniving wins. My father was a killer who took no prisoners in either his private or business life. If you ever ripped him off or tried to take advantage, he would hunt you down and make you squeal like a pig. He lovingly passed this wisdom on to me, telling me to screw people before they screwed me. That's where I came from. So imagine my surprise when I started to actually go to the companies, and there's quite a list. Some of them are 136,000 employees. For example, Unilever. I mean, if you go in and look, they are trying to walk the talk. So the one that was most amazing to me was, and okay, you're going to go, oh, but it isn't. But they're all joining this corporation called B Corp. Should I tell you a little about that? I hadn't realized that until recently. B Corp is a certificate you get now if you're pretty trend, if you follow these, if you follow the remit. I hadn't realized that recently. Shareholders could sue a company. Shareholders could sue a company if they didn't maximize profit. B Lab, or B Corp, has created a new late state by state across the US, in some countries and in some countries in Europe and Latin America. Now companies are allowed to have a social or environmental mission written into their charter. So businesses who care about the community and global issues and are fair to their workers can get a B Corp certificate. Now, people are now tripping over themselves to get this B Corp, because it's not just millennials, but I think people are fed up, and there will be apps soon where you can tell if somebody in Vietnam got blind sewing your zipper into your jeans, or the chicken was a schizophrenic that you're eating. We will be able to check it out. And I think the next fad is they won't buy from you. So example, Patagonia, I went to work for them in the sportswear company. Well, they've been going 40 years. I know not every company's like that, but people are trying to emulate some of that in British companies. For example,
yes, I mean,
recyclable, the way they're building their buildings, sometimes between their buildings, there's sort of schools for their kids. And so they can look down and they say they can hear from their laughter why they're working for the next generation. Every employee has to have a kind of environmental, that's their baby, or they work locally. So in Unilever, Ben and Jerry's are working with refugees. You can look it up. Dove are working with girls with body dysmorphia. PG Tips has something in India called Have a Cup of Tea and Chat. And they have cafes where if you're transgender or gay, you go in and have a cup of tea. I mean, each one of them is trying to make the world better. Not all companies, because we're still in the climate of, may the best man win. And by the way, can I just say something? When Darwin, I thought this was interesting, said survival of the fittest, he didn't mean the meanest and the, most, the greediest.
Yeah.
He meant the people who cooperate the best. They survive the best. That's was the meaning. And then an industrialist called Herbert Spencer used that phrase so that he could justify exploiting the poor and making as much money as he could. And they all jumped on it. Rockefeller, Carnegie, all the way to Gordon Gekko, who said greed is good.
I'm half convinced. I'm quite tempted to bring in the co-founder of Tortoise, one of my bosses, Katie Vanek Smith, who herself is a marketeer, who made a point of saying when I brought this up, not all marketeers are bad, Merope, because of my cynicism about this. Katie, if you're there and willing to speak, we'd love to hear from you. But I've also, there she is. But I also love Emma's comment that you can get fair trade, vegan, CO2 neutral condoms now, so you can have ethical, safe sex. Who knew? Thanks, Emma. Hi, Katie.
Hi. Well, I mean, obviously, I'm just going to say that because I spent 20 years being a marketeer.
But
so,
how cynical should we be about conscious capitalism?
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think people are waking up to, I mean, Ruby's made the point about purpose. And actually, that's something that humans have to have, but actually businesses, through mainly the marketing functions, actually, have woken up to that over the last 10, 15 years. And the B Corp organization and movement that Ruby's talking about has now got thousands of companies that are sort of trying to emulate sort of early sort of B Corp companies like the Patagonias. But I think it's good to be cynical. It's good to be cynical about things. It is good to question things. So sort of human cynicism is a healthy thing. And so, if you take a cynical approach to some of the things you see, you'll ask more questions of it. And if you ask more questions of it, then you'll actually find out whether, it is honest in the claims than not. But good marketeers would do exactly what Ruby says, which is good marketeers are trying to work out what customers want. And as customers are moving to be more demanding of the brands and the businesses that they buy from and invest in, then businesses will get better. And marketeers, power to their elbow, are the people that have to take that customer's voice into the boardrooms and change the people's perspectives faster, because the day of the CFO driving business decisions has to be not the way it's done, because it can't all be about profits. And we know that. So I think you should be more supportive of the marketeers, because the marketeers represent the customer's voice in the boardroom, and you want more people trying to get the customer into the boardroom than being driven by profits. That is my non-cynical version.
I don't know if, I'm a comedian, so cynicism is my business. Nothing's funny when I say, what a wonderful day, I saw a dolphin. Nothing, no career. I don't remember insulting marketeers in my comments. I had to go myself. I mean, that's the whole book, is that I got to go and see it with my own eyes. Now, there could be crap going on in the back room, but, I did bother, all the way the supply chains, they are taking care of them medically. They're not exploiting them. There's fairness. There's no top down in some of these companies. They work as teams. Again, it's a community, and that community has purpose. It's not just the widget or they're making soap. They get a commitment that means something to them. And, you work more hours than you're at home. So within the company, they can work for that purpose. And it gives them a reason to show up every day. I didn't mean to, I don't even know what marketeers, I hope I didn't insult you.
It was really me, because I was saying it was a cynical ploy by the marketeers in the background to brand themselves as and that's Katie was going to her defense, but mainly I got kudos from
that was you then. It wasn't me.
But I was really looking to have an excuse, as Andrew I think pointed out in the comments, to introduce my boss with a fair trade condom segue, which was quite neat and nicely pointed out. Let's move on from that to education.
I could talk about, where they're now offsetting carbon footprints on planes. They give you a packet of seeds, and when you get to your holiday, you got to plant it. It's all, there's all crap in that. I went to organic nail bars. That's the world we live in, but God bless them. A few people are trying to straighten it out, and it's not me.
Ruby, let's move on to education, which is a subject close to Tortoise's heart, because we did a big day on the future of education, pointing out a lot of the things that were wrong with it. And then it was really heartening to see you come to a lot of those in your book. You talked about not being particularly good at school.
I wrote the Declaration of Independence on my thighs.
I loved that. I loved that. The whole Declaration of Independence.
And I couldn't figure out who signed it because it melted on my inner thigh. I didn't pass. I couldn't.
You had to audition for drama school 7 times. I love the line, "You may suck at what you're doing, but steer straight ahead like a deranged arrow, and if you fail, you fail." I wanted to read that to my kids. But anyway, the point is you visited lots of schools which you felt might have been better for you or for more children than this sort of, exam, test. I mean, you went to China and you visited 2 types of schools in China, which is quite interesting.
The China thing is particularly funny because it's the Antichrist. Is there anybody Chinese watching? Okay. It's the Antichrist of education, but they do have schools that are beginning to emulate what I saw in Finland and what's...
You weren't a fan of the Chinese education system.
What?
You weren't a fan of the Chinese education system.
Well, you go in and they're kind of chanting the times tables. If I came in and nobody turned around, and then I asked the teacher, was there depression at all? And she said, no depression, but there were a lot of suicides, she said with kind of pride. And then she showed me to a red padded cell and says, she didn't even have a word. When they feel a little, the word stress doesn't exist either. When they feel, I don't know, something, they put them in the red padded cells and they literally bounce off the walls. And the mothers compete for which kid sleeps the least. So when they start falling asleep, they stand up because they work pretty much through the night. It was unbelievable.
But tell us about the good ones. The
good ones, there's a couple, again, I say they're state run. So everybody goes, oh, it'll cost too much. There's a few of them called Reach 2, for example. Okay. So it's in a very disadvantaged neighborhood. The families are falling apart. There's no money, there's drugs. So these kids come to a school, and when they come, you can see them kind of the next generation of traumatized, and whatever that leads to, criminality maybe. So the teachers teach them empathy. Now you could go, oh, well, what does that mean? They work together as a team. They all have a buddy. So in the morning, okay, you can nod your head, but you should see the test results where they began and where they are now, is they go in a circle and they say what they appreciate about the next kid. They're trained like this from 5. So one kid turned to me and said, oh, I appreciate you even caring about us enough to show up. They don't know I work on TV. Okay. So after that, then they go to a classroom where they're taught to regulate their stress, which can be taught. For example, when they feel themselves, getting riled up into that fight and flight, we don't usually recognize it. We think, oh, that's how we work. They realize they can't think straight. Maybe they're about to take an exam. They go in a corner and there's a sheet of paper, one's red, one's green, one's yellow, one's green. So they know they're in the red zone because there's faces of fear and anger and despair. And they have tools then that they've been trained to use. There's breathing balls that expand and contract. There's a jar that has glitter in it and they shake it and then it's all murky. But as the glitter settles, they've been taught to settle their mind too. And they know when they're in the yellow and when they're in the green zone, they're in, homeostasis, they call it. Just the heartbeat goes back to normal. Then they take the exam and the results are off the chart. If you take an exam when you're agitated or fearful, B, you'll burn yourself out. There'll be a couple kids that are geniuses. They'll be fine, but emotionally, I don't know if they'll be available. But these kids really are resilient and they break your heart with their honesty. They talk about a little kid, very nervous, said he felt, he told me how he felt. So once you say it, it's out and you can't go at him with any aggression. Your heart just goes out to him. And the teachers say there's no such thing as a stupid question. Think of how I would have flourished. It's only stupid questions because they know these are the kids that are going to think out of the box, because 80% of 8-year-olds, there won't be jobs when they get the right age. that exist now. So we might as well teach them empathy, because that a robot will never be able to do.
I mean, you're such a huge fan of mindfulness techniques, and you retrained, didn't you? And do you want to just tell us a bit about how you came to do that yourself?
Mindfulness? Well, I gave them my money to shrink. Yeah. I became a shrink. And I studied psychotherapy just so I could figure out who was ripping me off. And I wasn't I did get my degree, and I did 200 hours, but sometimes I'd feel myself going, oh, just get to the punchline. I could edit, I could put this all together for you. Anyway, I wasn't very good, but I wanted to find a way to be able to regulate my own emotions, so that I wouldn't have to keep going to a shrink at 2 a.m. They would enlighten me, and then by 3, I'd forget again. So I looked in journals. I had depression so seriously about 15 years ago. So I thought, I've got to do something that could help or make me more aware of the situation. So it turned out, after I read a lot of science journals, mindfulness and cognitive therapy had the most evident, it had the best results, including medication. Now, it doesn't work for everybody. It could have been crystal healing, but it happened to be meditation. So I wanted to find out who invented this or who created it. So I found one of the creators is Mark Williams at Oxford. And I said, I really want to know what happens in the brain, because I'm not waving an angel card. And I don't, if I can't smell it or taste it, I don't buy it. So he said, if you want to know what happens in the brain, you'd have to get into Oxford and get your master's. When I say I was below sea level in my SATs, I mean, I was like, I had the intelligence of a houseplant. My mother was so ashamed. She made me take the exam again, the SATs, and it was even lower. I won't even say what the score was. But here's neuroplasticity. At a certain age, I got fascinated with neuroscience. And when I had my interview, I said, I don't care if you guys don't take me, I'm going to study this anyway. Anyway, I did have good grades in certain areas. So I did get in, and I took my comedy and I applied it to neuroscience. And that's how I started doing this kind of comedy. Not that this book is about neuroscience, the last one was, but I like to take a serious subject the way Bill Bryson does. Like, he writes about the history of the world, and then he spins it into comedy. And I'm trying to emulate him, because I think the only way to get information down people's throats is to make them laugh, because their mouth is open anyway.
So your book has a lot of very funny lines, and we're going to come to one of my favorites in a little bit. But Rupert is there. He's got a question for you. I could read it out, Rupert, if you'd like to ask it yourself. Now is the moment. Ruby is yours.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, Joe's my son's in the background as well, just in his
Hello,
shorts.
Rupert's son.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Ruby. Hello. Yeah, it's been. I've read a lot of your books. Really enjoyed them, and the way you communicate those ideas is amazing for an audience like I get an audience in the UK. I just wondered how well you think mindfulness is understood and respected in this country. I think Buddhism's got a lot to teach us, but there's also been obviously some criticism that some of these modern techniques have detached a little bit from their ethical roots. And I wondered what you made of, I guess, how the marketeers and the comms people are doing with mindfulness in England.
There we go, Katie. Another one, just a little, it's you again. But anyway, back to Ruby.
As I say, us humans have a kind of a glitch, which is that we they say out of about 5 thoughts, 4 are negative, that we're Velcro, we're Tupperware for positive thoughts and Velcro for negative ones. And again, there's a reason back in time we had to be on our toes, because if we had big smiley faces, we would have been eaten. So we do think always look for the negative. But let me just say, everything that's ever come up, from reading to when we used, cars instead of walking, people always thought this is the end of humanity. So we've always had this kind of proclivity to take something that's very interesting and then smear it and ruin it. So now we have mindfulness coloring books, or you have, they bring it into businesses and everybody breathes a little bit and then they treat each other like shit again. But the actual mindfulness and you have to go to the source of John Kabat-Zinn, who invented it, who was a molecular biologist, of Professor Mark Williams. If you go to the source and you study what exactly happens in the brain, that it does deactivate that amygdala. It does bring down that fight and flight, but not on a weekend workshop. It's like going to a gym. You can't do one sit-up and get a six-pack. But gradually, there's evidence, not for everybody, because some people, were different fingerprints, but certainly you start to have a different relationship with your thoughts. They come in, it's a crap show every morning for me, but you practice a little bit observing them, so I don't get dragged into this compulsive behavior. And having depression, that's important. I want to know when my thoughts are getting destructive. The normal ones I can't help. I always have the loop tape. You're an idiot. Everybody knows you're a failure. I'm not good enough. I realize everybody's got that music in the background, and there's a reason why. But and whether you're in Mexico or you're in China, everybody's got the tape going. It's just different.
So that brings us neatly to your next chapter.
Did that answer the question? So, but the practice of mindfulness is like practicing ballet. You either do it or you don't do it, And if you go to a course and they don't have accreditation, that's like going to a therapist who then throws water on you. So I can't help the world, but I know the empirical evidence.
Thank you so much, Rupert and Rupert's son, for joining us. Ruby, what you were just saying reminded me of one of my favorite things in your books, which was your 2 app ideas. You kept saying, software developers, you can have these. One of them is called Shitter, an app for where we can talk in 140 characters about our low self-esteem. I quite like that one. But the other one was called Human to Human. Tell us
I made that up. That was my tech.
Yeah.
Well,
Human to Human. I love the human.
We're on tech, where I did have to, and this was hard to find because everybody, even Zuckerberg had a great, they started off innocently. All his Harvard friends wanted to just, gossip. I don't know what they were gossiping about because they weren't going out with girls, but they were doing that. Instagram just wanted to show pictures of their holiday. The thumbs up, thumbs down just was to encourage people. But then money comes into it, and I don't have to. The bad news you can read yourself. Data hackers, people who know algorithms, you'll never be able to keep up. And you will, buy shoes at 4 a.m. because they know exactly when my addiction is at its highest. They know exactly what they're doing. So again, it's not your fault. But again, mindfulness does help a little bit. I can tell when I'm on my 10,000 pair of shoes. I know that I've hit my tipping point.
So tell everybody about your Human to Human app. It's an app where
there are a few apps, so let me say, that are on the market. For example, there's one Richard Davidson is inventing it, where they're almost as much fun as what games are now, but they teach the kids empathy. Okay, I describe it in here, but it's a new way of teaching, and it's using the idea of gaming. But I came up with Human to Human. What I say that when you're sitting at your keyboard, you just hit something, and somebody comes up from somewhere in the world, right? It's at random, and now they're on your screen, and the rules are you have to look at each other for 30 seconds without saying anything. Just really notice every feature on their face. It gives you instructions. Then after 30 seconds, there's bells. You can get your own ringtone. And then for 30 seconds, the other person tells you about themselves, but there's questions that they have to answer. I forgot what they are. They're things like, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was the last thing that you felt you loved? They're suggested things for them to discuss. There's a translator if they don't speak your language. After about a minute, the bell goes, then you go back and you talk about one of these topics. What do you dream about? What did you hope for, but that didn't happen? You just choose one of the topics. You talk for 30 seconds, the bell goes, and then you communicate with each other about what your reaction was to the other one, just for a little while. And then again, the bell goes after a minute, and then you just look at each other again. And you think about, what did you think when you first saw them, and what's different now? And it only lasts, that's another minute, bell goes, and they disappear. You never see them again. But I think it does somebody has to train us, because this doesn't come naturally, that if we don't become aware, we are natural born bigots. Again, let's blame the old tribal thing. But, you know, I always say those who migrated north from Africa got lighter skin to absorb the sun's rays and synthesize vitamin D. So finding out the color you are now is based on which direction your forefathers walked in has bummed out a lot of bigots. So I think we have to train ourselves to start to see people as human beings, and that becomes your community, even though you'll never see them again.
Thank
Do you like my idea?
I did like your idea, actually. I would do it. Someone says it sounds like chat roulette, but less risky. But I did think how lovely. What a lovely thought. And it
International Tinder, but you don't date them, you look at them.
Twitter. Someone else says that they love your idea. I'm aware we've only just got just under 15 minutes left. So I'm going to skip to your last chapter, which was one of my favorites. And this is where I come to my favorite line in your book, because you volunteered at a refugee camp, which I'd love to hear all about. But I would just like to tell everyone that at this refugee camp, you put yourself in charge of shallowness and arranged for manicures for lots of the women there, which I thought was really funny.
I'm pretty honest, aren't I?
I just loved the idea of being head of shallowness at a refugee camp. Tell us about that experience.
Well, I picked 3 charities that I really thought worked from the heart. You know, they weren't working for a big organization and doing dance numbers. They were on the ground. They were my age when I was hopeful. They were about in their 20s, and they had the eyes that reminded me of what my eyes used to look like. So I wanted to be around them. You know, they had those hearts of gold, and, you know, no shilly-shallying. They were on the front lines. So they took me to Samos. I first went to another camp, and I didn't like it. I wasn't popular at all, and nobody would invite me to dinner, and I got really pissed off. And there were 2 Norwegians called Ass and Turd, and they really ignored me. It became a popularity contest. And meanwhile, people are living in tin cans. And I could really see how shallow I was, because nobody was inviting me to lunch. You know, you really get to learn about yourself. Anyway, so I moved camps, and then Holly and Molly really loved me, so I flourished. And they took me to Samos, and they introduced me. You saw the refugees. And I thought, well, what can I bring to the table? I'm ashamed, but I think some of them just liked me because I was there. And I would, for example, in the Women's Center, which God bless her, Holly and Molly arranged, these are the girls that have the phone numbers of people who can build buildings and clean sewers. And they can bring them in overnight. None of this getting money from some dinner party, and then years later it shows up on the island. But anyway, they pretty much build miracles there. So I'm in the Women's Center, and I'm looking at a beautiful girl with long purple dreadlocks. They only get this much water a month, but she uses it to color her hair, and she's beautiful. And they were, I don't know, there's free lunch there. And so I said, oh, and her name's Princess, how did you end up here? And Princess said, and there was no giveaway that this had happened. And she said, she comes from Somalia or whatever, and her husband makes music. So he took videos of the riots going on in the street, and he put it to music, and he put it online. And then the police came and said, could we please have that tape? And he said, honestly, I don't have it. And they shot her daughter, who was standing next to her. And then there was another woman who they wanted her son to join the army in Afghanistan or somewhere, and he was too young, and so they took him and tortured him for a week and then gave him back, and he's living with her in the camp. Unfortunately, there's 2 doctors for 5,000 people, no psychiatrists, but said with such talk about resilience. I mean,
yeah, I'm unbelievable.
Upset because there's, I don't know, I don't want to say it, but Americans especially yapping about, I don't know what they're yapping about, but this is an emergency situation. And I didn't know what to do. I just visited them. I even went to the refugee camp. Finally, they took me because one guy really hated me. He thought he said, why don't you just Google it? There's a lot of people who are porn, addicts. So I really had to convince him I was writing a book and blah, blah. But he hated me up until the last moment. that he said, you cannot go into that camp. Eventually, because he could see I was funny, he said, okay, meet me in the lobby, I take you. But he said, shut up, whatever you do, shut up. So he takes me and we walk to the camp, and a little boy about 8, they're living in garbage bags. There's there's toilets somewhere. And they have to queue for food for about 8 hours. So a little boy says, can he help me down because it's on a slope. This is a kid from the refugee camp, and he holds my hand so that I don't slip. And then he gets to his plastic bag and says, thank you. I mean, you know, there's a difference seeing these people on television and seeing them in the flesh. So here's my horror. I didn't know what to do, but I wanted to do something. So in the Women's Center, I said, would everybody like to learn Pilates? And they all came the next day, and I laid out the mats and I had them do some sit-ups. And I got to about 10 and I said, you know, it'll be hard in the beginning, so we could stop now. And they looked at me. These women carried their furniture on their heads from Africa, right? They came with pianos on their shoulders, and I'm asking them if 10 sit-ups are too hard for them. And nobody was cruel. I mean, I would have chopped me up in tiny pieces. And then I had another idea that I said, let's get manicures. I thought, I'm on a roll now. And they all wanted to get manicures. So I took them, 10 of them. I have photos that they're so breathtakingly beautiful. The excitement of picking out the colors, we were there all day, and then holding them up for my photographs. And I wish you could see this, holding them up, and they were, I mean, ravishing. But they had a moment of normality. And then I brought them cappuccinos. You know, they don't come down that mountain. And there was the guy who really hated me. And now he started to kind of laugh because he thought, she's pathetic. She got a manicures, but they were so happy. And then off they went into the night to go back to their plastic bags. Well, that changes you.
Yeah.
And after this book, I only crave to do stuff. I've signed up to go to Lesbos and they won't let me go, but I only want to do stuff like that. I only want to live in a community. And if I work, it's got to be teamwork. So I am in a community now in Scotland. This is an intentional community. And every morning, I've never done this, I work in a garden and I pick kale and it goes to a food bank. I've never been this happy in my life. In my home, I have artificial flowers in my garden. So everybody here smiles at you, not in a stupid way. And they're professors and doctors and startups. They have more startups up here than they do anywhere in Europe. It's the biggest concentration. And as far as environmental stuff, they're ahead of the game. So I'm near the source. This is a woman who really is not eco-friendly at all. But if you're around it, you become a good tennis player. You know, if you're the professional, you will return the ball. So I like who I am up here. I don't like who I am in London. I don't like the person who goes to parties and makes people like me that I don't even like.
It sounds like you're a real convert, Ruby.
I can't live like this. I need to make some money. But kale is really the way to go.
I'm sure there's a balance somewhere. And yeah, let's not knock kale. You know, Michelle here says,
love kale. I'm picking it.
Sorry? Yeah, no, I know. I'm
generally. The home is only kale?
I'm misty-eyed for you and your journey, Ruby, and your immense ability to care, learn, and get the messages out there. Thanks for still being the wonder that is you. That's from Michelle in the comments. And just, I wonder if we can go to Jill Douglas here in the last few minutes, who I just think has got a really sort of pertinent question for now, which is, are you there, Jill?
I am. Hello. Oh, wow. This is amazing. I'm such a massive fan of Ruby, and now I'm speaking to her. Wow. Yeah, but how to follow that amazing story about your experience with the refugees. Wow. Yeah, I was just wondering, you're so knowledgeable through your studies on psychotherapy and your own experience. I wondered if you had any tips for us based on what you've seen and learned about how to get through this really difficult time. Those of us, some are alone, some are not, but it's all difficult in whatever your situation is. So yeah, any advice for kind of this bizarre lockdown coronavirus situation?
Well, you see, I'm not everybody, and I'm not a politician, so I can't do mass pronouncements. But I do, you know, I'm sorry, I wanted to do something for community during lockdown. That's not that easy. So I have Frazzle Cafe. Maybe somebody else could do something else. I don't know, some service where they knock on people's doors and look at the people. But if we don't make contact with each other, we're dead. The next pandemic, I don't want to bring the bad news, is going to be mental health. So somehow, Emma, were you the first one who said, you know, she goes online with this? You know, we've got to see people. We have to make contact. And when we see them, be a little more honest instead of discussing wine tasting. You know, speak a little from the heart, because that's how humanity works. It's human to human. Now, if you can't get out of the house and you don't have the internet, maybe the family could call them. But if people, loneliness is what kills people. Sorry. I mean, it also affects longevity, and mental is physical. If you're stuck and nobody's making contact, you don't flourish. So it behooves everybody to know that when we get out of here, to remember that it's interconnectedness that's going to save the world. So if you can even contact one person, you know, and give them that heart, that oxytocin, that juice, it passes to the next person and the next person like a ripple effect. I didn't make this up. Somebody said we work like neural Wi-Fi. So if you could just, I don't know, when we get out of here, open a door for somebody, pick up their thing when they drop it, give somebody some free food. I don't know, but those little acts will make you live longer. And I don't know what to do in lockdown, except I made Frazzled, and that's my only contribution. I can't change the world.
I think that's enough. I mean, but you also talk in the book about someone who was the king of bluffing, who got free stuff and gave it away. What was his name?
Oh my God, David Goodfellow.
Yeah.
There's something called one of my 3 world savers it's called the kindness offensive, and he had depression, and to help him during depression, his friend taught him how to phone whisper, which means you call up a company and you get them to give you free stuff. Well, probably in the beginning he did it for selfish reasons, but eventually he got like Tesco and things to give him hundreds of thousand pounds worth of food. So these huge trucks showed up. He didn't know what the tonnage was. You know, they gave him it in weight. He thought it was, the whole street got filled, and then they invited through the internet or whatever, everybody who needed food to come and get the food. And now he runs something where they have toys in a factory, and they have cakes, and they have presents. And so I went out with them at Christmas. They have a red double-decker bus. You can join. Here's something that'll make you feel better. And the job was I run up to people on the street and give them gifts, flowers, bouquets, champagne. He got it free. And you'd see people's faces, like when I first would come to them, they kept saying, how much? And their faces were totally closed. And gradually I'd say, it's free. And then you watch the lights come on, and you change people in a split second. We went to a home for the elderly. They were all singing, and we gave them chocolates. And the nuns took care of them, and we gave them flowers. I mean, talk about, this is like winning the lottery. I did it for 10 hours because you get high on it. You know, you choose people who would like usually tell you to, you know, screw off, give them presents. And they go, no. And I go, it's free. It's free. And then you'd see their faces. Well, anyway, you could join that. I mean, I'll give you a list of things. So everything in the book, you could take a little morsel and use it at home. I'm not giving you, you know, here's a top tip. These are things that exist. They're extreme, but take a little bit and use it. Because now I'm in a community and I'm happy. Yeah. But you don't have to do that. Just maybe give your neighbors some zucchini.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you, Jill, for that. It's a good place to end on, because at the end of Ruby's book, she talks about how COVID is a wake-up call. It's nature's way of telling us we've screwed up and we need to do better. And your book is full of lots of ways and people who are doing better and positive things happening in the world, which sort of feels what we all need right now. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all your mental health tips. You just said interconnectedness will save the world, and I hope everyone feels a little bit more connected from being together tonight. So thank you for taking the time and talking about your book. And now for some good news, which is, I believe, in the shops now. And enjoying Scotland. And as is ever the case, look, there's a little emoji clap. I haven't seen that before. You can emoji clap or just give Ruby a wave as we see each other out. Thanks everyone for joining us. See you again.
Bye bye. Thanks.